The unwritten law that governs all human relationships, Durkheim's invisible bonds. Every person you've ever loved is connected to you by an invisible thread. Every stranger you've passed on the street, every rival who's opposed you, these threads, millions of them, form a web so vast, so complex, that no individual can comprehend it. And yet, this invisible network shapes every decision you make, every thought you have, every emotion you feel. What if I told you that your sense of self, the very core of your identity, exists only because of these connections? Pause for a moment and consider this. Have you ever felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to conform, to follow roles that were never explicitly taught to you, to feel shame or guilt for breaking social norms that were never formally explained? This is not random. This is not coincidence. This is evidence of something profound operating beneath the surface of human consciousness. A force so powerful it can override your individual desires, yet so subtle you rarely notice its influence. Before we continue, if you enjoy unraveling hidden truths and uncovering the forces that shape our world, make sure to click that subscribe button. Your support allows us to continue bringing you the insights that truly challenge how we think. Now let's go deeper. In the late 19th century, a French sociologist named Émile Durkheim proposed something revolutionary. While his contemporaries were obsessed with the individual mind, Durkheim looked beyond it. He saw something remarkable, a phenomenon so essential to human existence that without it, society itself would collapse. He called it collective consciousness, the shared beliefs, attitudes, and moral judgments that bind people together into coherent societies. But this was just the beginning of his insight. What Durkheim realized, and what modern science is only now beginning to fully appreciate, is that this collective consciousness doesn't just influence us. In a very real sense, it creates us. Think about language for a moment. The words you're hearing right now, their meanings, their emotional resonance, none of this exists within you alone. Language is inherently social, a product of countless interactions across generations. You didn't invent the words you use daily. They were given to you by parents, teachers, friends, and strangers. And yet, these borrowed symbols form the foundation of your thoughts, your identity, your very sense of self. This is what Durkheim meant when he spoke of social facts, forces that exist outside any individual but shape every individual nonetheless. Like gravity, these social forces operate whether we acknowledge them or not. They constrain us, guide us, and ultimately make human society possible. Consider how profoundly your behavior changes in different social contexts. The person you are with your closest friends differs from the person you are with your parents, which differs from the person you are at work, which differs from the person you are alone. These aren't simply different masks you wear. They represent different aspects of your identity activated by different social bonds. You aren't pretending to be someone else in each context. You are becoming someone slightly different because the social configuration has changed. This brings us to Durkheim's most profound insight. The individual and the collective aren't separate entities in opposition to each other. They're two sides of the same coin, mutually creating and sustaining each other through constant interaction. Your individuality, your unique personality, preferences, and perspectives emerges from the particular way social forces intersect within you. Without these social forces, there would be no you to speak of. But here's where things get truly fascinating. These invisible bonds, these social connections, aren't just abstract concepts. They're literally keeping you alive right now. In 1897, Durkheim published a groundbreaking study on suicide. Conventional wisdom held that suicide was the most private, individual act imaginable, the ultimate expression of personal choice. But Durkheim discovered something shocking. Suicide rates remained remarkably stable within societies over time, regardless of which specific individuals died. More importantly, these rates varied predictably between different groups based on their social cohesion. Protestant communities had higher suicide rates than Catholic ones. Single people were more likely to take their own lives than married people. Civilians during peacetime died by suicide more often than citizens united by war. The pattern was clear and undeniable. The stronger the social bonds connecting a person to others, the less likely they were to end their life. This reveals something profound about human nature. We aren't simply independent minds inhabiting separate bodies. We are, at our core, Social creatures so deeply interconnected that our very survival depends on maintaining these connections. When these bonds weaken or break, we don't just feel sad or lonely, we begin to disintegrate as people. Consider an experiment conducted by neuroscientists at UCLA. They discovered that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Your brain processes the sting of a social snub using the same neural circuitry it uses to process a broken bone. This isn't metaphorical, it's literal. Your brain considers social connection so vital to survival that it treats its absence as a physical emergency. Why would evolution wire us this way? Because for millions of years, being separated from your social group didn't just mean loneliness, it meant death. No human could survive alone against predators, starvation, or the elements. Those who felt intense pain at separation were motivated to maintain group bonds, and thus, survived to pass on their genes. Even more remarkably, researchers have found that when we experience empathy for others, our brains mirror their emotional states. When you see someone in pain, neurons in your brain fire as if you were experiencing that pain yourself. This mirror neuron system suggests that we're biologically wired not just to understand others, but to literally feel with them. The boundaries between self and other may be far more permeable than we typically imagine. This brings us to a startling realization. What we experience as ourself, our thoughts, values, desires, and identity, isn't generated solely within us. It emerges from the intersection of countless social interactions. You are not just influenced by society, in many ways you are created by it. Think about your most deeply held moral beliefs. Where did they come from? You might assume they arose from careful personal reflection or logical analysis. But developmental psychologists know better. Children absorb moral values from their social environment long before they can articulate them. By the time you could reason abstractly, your moral foundation was already firmly established through countless social interactions. Or consider your consumer preferences, the brands you trust, the foods you enjoy, the music you love. While these feel intensely personal, they're profoundly shaped by your social environment. Marketing executives understand this intuitively. They don't just sell products based on their intrinsic qualities, but on their social associations. The most successful brands don't just offer functionality, they offer membership in an imagined community. The philosopher Charles Taylor describes humans as self-interpreting animals. But what he and Durkheim understood is that we don't interpret ourselves in a vacuum. We use conceptual tools given to us by our culture. We see ourselves through others' eyes. We evaluate our worth based on social feedback. Our very sense of self is negotiated through a lifetime of social exchanges. In fact, recent research in cognitive science suggests something even more radical. Consciousness itself may be fundamentally social. The capacity to be aware of your own thoughts and feelings likely evolved not for introspection but for social coordination. The ability to understand yourself exists because it helps you understand others, and vice versa. The developmental psychologist Michael Tomasello has shown that even basic cognitive skills like pointing to objects emerge through social interaction. Before a child can direct their own attention through conscious will, they learn to follow the pointing finger of a caregiver. Self-regulation begins as social regulation. Your ability to direct your own mind grows from others first directing it for you. But here's where we encounter a profound paradox, perhaps the central tension of human existence. While we are fundamentally social beings, created and sustained by our connections to others, we experience ourselves as separate, autonomous individuals. This illusion of separation is so powerful, so convincing, that we structure our entire societies around it. Modern Western culture in particular champions the myth of the self-made individual, the independent actor who succeeds through personal merit alone. We celebrate autonomy and self-reliance while downplaying our fundamental interdependence. The result is a society that simultaneously depends on social bonds while systematically weakening them. Consider how we approach mental health. When someone experiences depression or anxiety, we typically frame it as an individual chemical imbalance or personal psychological issue. We rarely consider that these disorders might be natural responses to social disconnection. And yet, rates of depression and anxiety have risen steadily alongside increasing social isolation. Yuhan Hari, in his exploration of depression, argues compellingly that many cases represent not a brain malfunction but a rational response to a lack of meaningful connection. The brain isn't broken. It's sending an urgent signal that a fundamental human need isn't being met. Yet our medical system responds by trying to change brain chemistry rather than addressing the underlying disconnection. Our economic systems similarly ignore the social dimension of human existence. We measure success in terms of individual wealth accumulation, not collective well-being. We incentivize competition over cooperation, personal gain over public good. Is it any wonder that loneliness has reached epidemic proportions in the wealthiest countries on Earth? The evidence for the health impact of social connection is overwhelming. When researchers at Brigham Young University conducted a meta-analysis of studies involving over 3.4 million participants, they found that social isolation increased mortality risk by about 30%, making it more dangerous than obesity or smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Other studies show that strong social connections improve immune function, lower inflammation, and even slow cellular aging. The Blue Zones research, which studies communities with exceptional longevity, consistently finds that strong social ties are a critical factor in living a long, healthy life. In Okinawa, Japan, people form moais, social support groups that last for decades. In Sardinia, Italy, multiple generations live together, with grandparents remaining actively involved in family life. In each blue zone, people don't just live longer. They remain mentally sharp and physically capable well into old age. But the influence of social bonds extends far beyond physical health. They shape our cognitive abilities, our emotional regulation, even our perception of reality itself. Take the famous Asch conformity experiments of the 1950s. When participants were asked to match line lengths, an objectively simple task, 75% gave obviously wrong answers at least once when surrounded by Confederates giving incorrect responses. Their perception of reality itself was altered by social pressure. Or consider the Stanford prison experiment, where ordinary students assigned to play guards quickly became sadistic, while those assigned as prisoners became passive and depressed. The mere suggestion of social roles fundamentally transformed their behavior and self-perception within days. More recently, social psychologists have demonstrated how easily humans form group identities and begin discriminating against outsiders. In the minimal group paradigm experiments, people randomly assigned to arbitrary groups, like the blue team versus the green team, quickly begin showing preference for their own group members, even when they know the assignment was random and meaningless. These experiments reveal something profound. Our identities are not fixed, stable entities residing within us. They're dynamic, flexible, and extraordinarily responsive to social context. Who you are literally changes based on who you're with and how you relate to them. This brings us to a disturbing realization. If our self-concept is so malleable, so vulnerable to social influence, how can we trust our most basic intuitions about who we are? If our thoughts, feelings, and values arise largely from our social context, what remains that we can truly call our own? Here lies the great challenge and the great opportunity of human existence. We are neither fully autonomous individuals nor mere products of our environment. We exist in a middle space, continually shaped by social forces yet capable of reflecting on and responding to those forces. We are both created by society and creators of it. Durkheim himself recognized this paradox. While emphasizing the power of social facts, he also acknowledged that societies evolve through the actions of individuals. The relationship between person and society isn't one way. It's dialectical, a continuous conversation where neither side has the final word. This perspective offers a profound shift in how we understand ourselves and others. It suggests that many of our most intractable problems, from political polarization to environmental destruction, stem from an artificial separation between self and society. We act as if our interests were separate from the collective, when in reality, they are inextricably linked. Consider climate change, perhaps the defining challenge of our time. Traditional economic thinking frames environmental protection as a cost to individual actors, creating a tragedy of the commons, where rational self-interest leads to collective disaster. But this framing assumes a fundamental division between self and environment that isn't actually sustainable. There is no thriving individual on a dying planet. Similarly, political polarization intensifies when we see those with different views as fundamentally separate from ourselves. We dehumanize those in opposing groups, refusing to recognize our shared vulnerabilities and aspirations. The more we emphasize difference over commonality, the weaker our collective bonds become, and the more all of us suffer as a result. What would happen if we fully embraced Durkheim's insight? If we recognized that the boundaries between self and other are more permeable than we imagine? If we acknowledged that our well-being is inseparable from the well-being of the whole? Perhaps we would design economic systems that measure success in terms of social connection and collective flourishing, not just individual wealth accumulation. Maybe we would approach mental health as a social issue requiring community solutions, not just an individual problem requiring medication. We might build cities that facilitate meaningful interaction rather than isolating people in private spaces. In some ways, this shift is already beginning. The field of behavioral economics has revealed countless ways that our decisions are shaped by social context rather than rational self-interest. Public health researchers increasingly focus on social determinants of health rather than just individual lifestyle factors. Urban planners experiment with designs that foster community rather than isolation. But this shift requires more than policy changes. It demands a fundamental reconsideration of what it means to be human. It challenges us to see ourselves not primarily as separate selves competing for scarce resources, but as nodes in a vast network of mutual influence and support. This doesn't mean surrendering individuality. Paradoxically, the strongest social bonds often nurture the most authentic expressions of individual uniqueness. Just as a skilled jazz ensemble allows each musician to improvise while maintaining collective harmony, a healthy society creates space for personal freedom within a framework of meaningful connection. The most striking aspect of Durkheim's insight is how it transforms our understanding of everyday interactions. That stranger who held the door for you this morning, that colleague who remembered your birthday, that friend who called when you were feeling down, these aren't just pleasant social niceties. They are threads in the invisible web that sustains your existence. Every act of kindness, every moment of genuine connection, every instance of cooperation. These strengthen the social fabric that keeps each of us psychologically and physically alive. Conversely, every act of cruelty, every moment of exploitation, every instance of unnecessary conflict, these tear at the same fabric, harming not just specific individuals but the collective body we all share. This perspective reveals something profound about morality itself. Ethical behavior isn't just abstractly right. It's literally life-sustaining. When we treat others with respect and compassion, we aren't just being nice. We're maintaining the social connections that every human being needs to survive and thrive. The great religious and philosophical traditions have always intuited this truth. From the Christian emphasis on love and community to the Buddhist concept of interdependence, from the African philosophy of Ubuntu, I am because we are, to the Confucian focus on proper relationships, wisdom traditions worldwide recognize that human flourishing depends on honoring our connections to others. Modern neuroscience, psychology, and sociology are simply confirming what these traditions have long taught. We exist not as isolated monads, but as participants in a complex web of relationships. Our actions ripple through this web, affecting others in ways we can barely comprehend, and their actions, in turn, help shape who we become. Perhaps most powerfully, Durkheim's insight offers a new way to understand meaning and purpose. In a universe that seems indifferent to human concerns, the web of social connections provides a source of meaning that transcends individual mortality. We are part of something larger than ourselves, not in some mystical sense, but in the very concrete reality of human interdependence. This is why people who volunteer regularly report greater life satisfaction, is why acts of generosity activate reward centers in the brain, is why people often find profound meaning in parenthood despite its challenges. These activities connect us to something beyond our individual existence, embedding our lives in a larger story that continues beyond us. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, observed that those who survived the concentration camps weren't necessarily the physically strongest, but those who maintained a sense of meaning through connection to others or to a purpose beyond themselves. Even in the most dehumanizing conditions imaginable, the ability to care for others or to believe in a future community sustained life when all else failed. The question becomes not, how can I succeed despite others? But, how can I contribute to a network that supports us all? Not, what can I accumulate for myself? But, what can I give that strengthens our collective resilience? This is the unwritten law that governs all human relationships. We exist not as isolated individuals, but as participants in a shared reality, continually creating each other through countless interactions. Our lives are meaningful to the extent that they enrich this common world. The great tragedy of our time may be that we've built societies that obscure this fundamental truth. We've created economic, technological, and social systems that isolate us while maintaining the illusion of connection. We scroll through social media feeds showing hundreds of friends, while sitting alone in our apartments. We work in open offices, where real conversation is discouraged. We live in dense cities surrounded by strangers. Paradoxically, technological advances that promise to connect us often deepen our isolation. Social media platforms designed to facilitate connection frequently substitute shallow digital interaction for deeper face-to-face engagement. Dating apps multiply our options while making genuine intimacy more elusive. Streaming services allow us to consume the same content without the shared experience of watching together. The result is a peculiar kind of suffering, what sociologist Robert Putnam called bowling alone. We experience the pain of disconnection while lacking the vocabulary to name it, often misdiagnosing it as personal failure or inadequacy. We blame ourselves for feeling empty in a world where material abundance has never been greater, but meaningful connection grows increasingly rare. But there's reason for hope. Across disciplines, from neuroscience to economics, from psychology to urban planning, researchers are rediscovering what Durkheim knew over a century ago. We're beginning to recognize the vital importance of social bonds and to design interventions that strengthen them. Community organizations experiment with co-housing arrangements that balance privacy with shared spaces and activities. Workplace innovators create environments that foster collaboration and meaningful relationships among colleagues. Healthcare systems incorporate social prescribing, where doctors prescribe community involvement alongside traditional treatments. More importantly, at an individual level, people are hungering for genuine connection. The very fact that loneliness has been recognized as a public health crisis suggests a growing awareness of our social nature. The pandemic, for all its devastation, revealed just how essential human contact is to our well-being. As physical distancing became necessary for survival, the pain of separation made visible what had long been ignored, our fundamental need for one another. So what does this mean for you personally? It means that every interaction, no matter how seemingly insignificant, is an opportunity to strengthen or weaken the invisible bonds that sustain us all. It means that your well-being depends not just on what you achieve or acquire, but on the quality of your connections to others. It means that contributing to the common good isn't just morally laudable, it's essential for your own flourishing. When you volunteer at a local community garden, you're not just beautifying a neighborhood, you're creating spaces where meaningful connections can form. When you check in on an elderly neighbor, you're not just performing a kind act, you're strengthening the social fabric that supports everyone, including yourself. When you participate in civic life, you're not just fulfilling a duty, you're helping create the conditions for collective thriving. The next time you feel the subtle pressure of social norms, the next time you find yourself instinctively conforming to unwritten roles, remember, this isn't just social conditioning. It's evidence of the invisible threads that bind you to every other human being. Threads that have sustained our species for millennia, that make civilization possible, that give your life meaning beyond mere survival. The question is not whether these bonds exist or matter. The evidence for their importance is overwhelming. The question is whether we have the wisdom to recognize them, the courage to strengthen them, and the vision to build societies that honor them. In a world increasingly fragmented by technology, ideology, and economic forces, Durkheim's insight offers a path toward reintegration, not by surrendering our individuality, but by recognizing that our individuality itself exists only in relation to others. We are not diminished but enlarged by acknowledging our interdependence. So as you go about your day, as you interact with family, friends, colleagues, and strangers, Remember that you're not just exchanging information or coordinating activities. You're participating in the ongoing creation of a shared reality that makes your own existence possible. Every moment of genuine connection is a victory not just for the individuals involved, but for humanity itself. If this exploration of social bonds and collective consciousness has made you think, challenged your assumptions, and sparked a deeper curiosity about life and sociology, then make sure to subscribe. Don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with those who need to hear this truth. Because in sharing ideas that matter, we strengthen the very bonds we've been discussing, creating meaning not just for ourselves, but for all those we touch.